Welcome to Forbidden Planet 42, where we ask the vital question: what is the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything? And we celebrate 42 epic years of Forbidden Planet in London with my man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Kevin Smith, Mr. Clerks, Mr. Chasing Amy, Mr. Tusk, all of that great stuff. Mr. Fat Man much. Beyond, here he is.
Absolute pleasure to be here for Forbidden Planet 42. I remember the first time I think I went over to the UK, it wasn't with Clerks. We tried to go with Clerks to the London Film Festival, but when we got to the Newark airport, we missed our flight. Even though they were on the ground for 2 more hours, they're like, you missed getting on the plane. So I didn't go then, and we didn't go with Mallrats. So I guess it would be around circa Chasing Amy. And one of the most important things to me about the trip to London was like, we have to go to Forbidden Planet. Forbidden Planet was a well-known comic book store before there were comic book stores to even be known, let alone well-known. Like it had been whispered about in New Jersey. You would read about it in the letters columns of comic books or Starlog magazine or something like that. Yeah. It's an amazing place where in the culture, comic books were prized. It wasn't just like a bunch of kids reading comic books. It was elevated. They had their own shop. And, you know, nowadays people would have a hard time getting their head around a comic book shop because of COVID and closings and stuff. But there was a time when the idea of a comics only store was absolutely fucking ludicrous. So Forbidden Planet was doing it, laying track for the rest of us long ago, back when nobody believed in that sort of thing. So to be doing it as long as they have is a minor absolute miracle.
Yeah, amen. Thank you, mate. I really appreciate all of that. And you, of course, go way back with comics culture. Kev, what are your earliest memories of comic books? And what's your first? What dragged you into it all?
My earliest memory of comic books is my old man he worked the night shift at the post office where they sort the mail, the sectional center. So he would get off, I guess, at 7 o'clock in the morning. And on his way home, he worked in Shrewsbury, so it was about a 20-minute, half-hour drive to our house. On his way home, he would stop and get a haircut, which is like, what fucking barber is open at 7 o'clock? This guy, Vinny the barber. So he, when it's time for me to get my first haircut, they take me to Vinny the barber. And it's old style, which is now the new style barber chair. Like now they've reopened barber shops in the last 10, 15 years, or whatever. So it was like that, like a big old barber chair and stuff that they cranked up and you could sit up. But I was too little, so they put a board across the two arms and I sat on the board. So before I got my hair cut, and it was unnerving because you're a kid and we've never had that done before. And this is all strange and new. Is it going to be like the dentist? Will this be painful? When you first got in there, it smelled like old men because the whole place is just old men getting their hair cut. And Vinny himself, the barber, was a very old man, running a black and white rabbit-eared television. And on the TV stand, under the TV, pile of comic books. So my dad was like, here, go look at these. And I was familiar with superheroes from the Super Friends and various TV shows. Marvel had done cartoons back in the day. And I knew there were comic books, but this was the first time, 4 years old at this point, first time that I actually get my hands on a comic book. And it's the Batman issue, the detective Neil Adams. The cover is Joker holding a giant playing card and Batman
oh, wow. Yeah, the Joker's 5-way revenge. That's what that is.
Beautiful story, a beautiful story, beautiful cover that captures a child's imagination. I knew Batman from TV, but what? I never saw this episode. What is this? So they had Hot Stuff, the Little Devil comics, Sad Sack, which was like a army comic for kids or something like that. Spider-Man as well. So, this weird process of getting my hair cut was ameliorated by leafing through the comic books, particularly, Batman, seeing Batman presented in a different way than I was used to ingesting Batman, either in animated form or Batman 66. Suddenly here he is on the page. looking different than he does in either of those incarnations. So, you know, when I got my hair cut and I lived through it, the barber gave me a lollipop and he let me take home comic book that I wanted. So I took home that Batman and stuff. And then comics became a part of my life. And, you know, we never had a comic book store growing up, but there was a confectionery store, Katz's Confectionery. It was a little lunch counter. You know, they do coffee and breakfast sandwiches and lunch later on, mostly a magazine stand. But they also, so they had a big rack of every magazine, and then they had spinner racks. Hey kids, comics. So I would go in there if my parents would give me extra money and stuff. They hated going to Katz's, but like comics were 35 cents at that point. So they'd give me, like, you know, if I did something cool, 35 cents, maybe 75 cents. I can go buy a couple comic books at Katz's and stuff. Now, comic books instilled in me a moral barometer. I was a Catholic kid, so naturally, you know, you'd imagine Christianity installed a moral barometer in me, but the one that mattered more was what came from comic books. Comic books teach you to be a good kid. They show you the lure of the trappings of, you know, being bad, so to speak, but primarily they're concerned with showing you, like, hey, and it all works out if you just do the right thing. So even though I was very attracted to that and it built my morality, I would steal comic books like crazy, particularly from Catholics. So I would go every week because they replaced comics every week. And I would go and I would select the ones that I wanted because they'd only be on the rack for a month and then they'd go away. So I didn't have all the money I wanted to buy all the comics I wanted. So I would pull the ones that I wanted and I would take them to another area of the store, and they had school supplies. And so they had one box of manila folders that nobody ever seemed to like pick through. So I lifted those up, put the comic books under there, and over the course of a month, I would store the comic books, so it would become a pretty healthy fucking pile. And then once a month, I would go back with a backpack, and I'd buy something, so that would be my, you know, I'd have an alibi for being in there and stuff. But at first, I'd go back, saunter, and then roll back to the school supplies, quickly duck down, grab all the comics, stick them in my bag, then go buy one thing at the counter and stuff like that. So, you know, even though comics gave me my morals, they taught me to steal as well, because I wanted to read them so damn badly. My favorite run of books from childhood, and this is weird because it's not even a story, is, do you remember when Marvel did the Marvel Universe Handbook?
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Single issues. It was, for those that don't follow, single issues that they later collected. It was basically an encyclopedia, Wikipedia, if we will, for the Marvel Universe. And, you know, you could buy a comic book and read an adventure, and it was always a cliffhanger to the next. But the Marvel Universe Handbook, man, like, it was everything you wanted to know about every character. So, like, I would pore over the Bullseye page. Like, just what, he could kill someone with a playing card? Like, you know, because they distill the character's history, all their appearances and their abilities and stuff. I love that book as a kid. I was a big fan, a subscriber at one point to Marvel Comics. They would come in the mail in a brown envelope.
Those brown envelopes with the
around it, no hard cardboard.
With,
so like
the tops of the comics revealed, all that stuff.
That was it. It was, I mean, it's honestly the same wrapping that Playboy would come in.
That's right.
Plain brown wrapper and stuff, and they'd roll it up, put it in your mailbox. So I was a subscriber to the Star Wars comic that Marvel did. I was a subscriber to Vision and the Scarlet Witch, which was a miniseries that they did. A subscriber to Spider-Man. You know, pure joy of this. Before there was an internet, before there was even cable TV, when mail was still magical. So you would come, like, you know, the way that I had ordered comics was staggered, and you're talking about it literally cost, like, a subscription was $5 a year. The way it was staggered every week, something would come in the mail. So I'd be reading Star Wars. Then after that, I'd be reading Spider-Man. After that, whatever other book. So it's always tied to joy, a happy childhood for me. And I didn't need to escape. I had a real happy childhood, great family and shit. I just loved it. I wasn't into sports. I was in more to what we now call pop culture. I loved comic books, movies, TV. Like, I cared about that shit. That shit was important. A lot of kids in my class cared about sports, you know, football, baseball, and shit like that, soccer. So I went another way at a time when predominantly it was kids in sports, you know, and I was kind of an awkward outlier in that way. Beautiful thing is the culture slowly shifted toward my interests. Like once I started making movies years later, you can see a comic book in Clerks. It's sitting on the counter where Randall's there. It's Detective Comics Annual with a Brian Boland cover on it. I still remember it was clear as day. It does the secret origin of the Joker inside, the Penguin, and Two-Face. Has a beautiful Boland cover. So that's the only, like, you know, Star Wars talk in Clerks, but there's no real like comic book stuff. Mallrats is when I lean into comic books.
It's drenched with comic book culture.
Totally with comic book culture, and not just like, hey, Brody likes comics and stuff, but like, look, Stan Lee's in it and whatnot. We're gonna bring up Wolverine for the first time ever in a movie, you know, before even the X-Men movie, bring it up and stuff like that. And because of that, you know, early on, I kind of put a badge on my sleeve about like, this is the shit I'm into. It's the same shit I was into as a fucking child. And as an adult, you know, I'd fallen out of comics as a kid. Like when I got to high school, I stopped with comics because I was like, I hope to get laid. And so comics went to the side. I know, it was a total stereotype. It wasn't after I got out of high school. High school is when I put the comics away. After I got out of high school, I met Walter Flanagan, my friend who was in all the movies. He was in Comic Book Men, the TV show we did over here for a long time. He was working at the Highlands Rec Center where I'd gotten a job. He was a huge comic book fan. He was older than me by 3-4 years. And he was one of the coolest people I knew, but he read comic books voraciously. And, you know, one day I said to my friend, Timmy Hill, ran the rec center. He was our boss, me and Walter's boss. I said, how do I reach Walt, man? I've been working with this cat almost a year and he just don't fucking talk to me about nothing. He goes, he loves comic books. If you know comic books, you can talk comic books with him. And so, you know, we were playing foosball the next day at the rec center. And rec center is where kids come to hang out after school. We had an after school latchkey kid program. So while parents are at work and shit, kid comes home from school at 3 o'clock. We play pool with them, kickball, give them some pudding. And then 6 o'clock, their parent picks them up and shit. So we're playing foosball with two of the kids. And I said, hey, you know, I know you like comic books. When I was in high school, like I wrote a report on Batman. You know, would you ever want to read it? And he was like, that's all right. But I brought it in anyway. He was completely disinterested. So I brought it in, I gave it to him. He came in the next day and he goes, you don't know anything about Batman. This is all about Batman, the TV show. I'm reading this. It's clear that you don't know anything about Batman. He gave me a copy of Dark Knight Returns, great Frank Miller's seminal work.
Of course. And
he said, you read this. This is Batman. He's going, you tell me that this is the Batman you want to know. So I went home and read it, absolutely fell in love with it, went back the next day and was like, this is comic books now? And this was 1980, early 89. I said, this is comic books? If this is comic books, then I want in, man, because this is amazing. He goes, yes, this is comics. The next time somebody says comics are for kids, he's like, you show them this picture of Batman breaking some fucker's spine. That's not that's metal. So I got into comics, re-got into comics at age 18, 19, with Walt Flanagan. Suddenly we had something to bond over. He didn't have a driver's license, so he had to rely on his mom to go bring him for comics. I had a driver's license, even though he was older than me. So I was like, hey, we can go to any comic book store you want. So that's how I also learned the state that I live in. Like we would drive up and down New Jersey. We would drive into Manhattan, going to comic book conventions, comic book stores, comic book shows, and church basements, finding a store in the phone book. This is before the internet. So you would look at a local phone book in the yellow pages and find maybe 3 listings per county for a comic book store. And then you go find it and stuff, and you hope that they didn't know that the Killing Joke was a wall book now. Like I remember walking into Three Little Bears comic book store, and they still had Killing Joke racked for the cover price, even though it was already going for 10 and 15 in some places. And me and Walter bought like every copy, and we were like, woo, you know, fucking, we were the luckiest day of our lives and shit. So I loved comic books, comic book culture. It infected my work early on. By Mallrats, I started being loud and proud about. Chasing Amy set in the world of comic book culture. with an inker and a penciler, you know, and indie comics at the heart and center of it and stuff. And Dogma is like a big comic book flat out come to life.
Right on.
So
Yeah.
I'd embrace that stuff like early on. And even though I've never made a comic book movie, I've directed some comic book shows, Flash, Supergirl and stuff. I'm really closely identified with comic book culture. Like the shit just worked out so well for me in as much as the culture shifted toward all the things that I liked and could speak eloquently about. Like if we were still a very sports centric culture, and don't get me wrong, I understand there are lots of sports aficionados all over and shit, but everyone can feel it, man. Pop culture has become the dominant culture and stuff. Everyone's mother even knows about Stan Lee's appearances in Marvel movies and stuff. Oh, there he is. Yeah. So at this point, like, I just lived long enough, and I'm so happy, and I'm sure you feel the same way.
Absolutely.
Lived long enough that we got to see everybody come over to our way of thinking without trying to convince people, without trying to tram it down their throats, being like, you must read Watchmen. It's the work of brilliance and shit.
No, the world has grabbed us, has absorbed us. We haven't had to grab the world. It's just gone.
It's all gravitated toward the shit that, you know, that is artful, that makes sense. It's like, why wouldn't the world gravitate towards strong storytelling? And comic book storytelling was a big fucking secret for a few decades. And now it's not anymore. Now people are like, oh my God, modern day myths. And you can pull anything from it. It doesn't have to be a Marvel movie. It can be Ghost World, you know, can be any number of things. It's creative. It's a creative space that proves its concept in a closed environment. If it works on a comic book page, why wouldn't it work on a cinematic screen or your television screen? So in a world where, like, for years comic books were dismissed as that's kid stuff, and only every once in a while you'd get a Superman movie or a Batman movie, now they understand this is creatively fertile stuff, man, creatively fertile material. And so we're seeing our childhood brought back to life in front of our eyes in all these movies. Thank the Lord.
Yeah, absolutely. Praise the Lord. I want to ask you about that in a second, but you touched upon briefly a name that I came to identify a lot with you. You did a lot of work with him in the last 10 years of his life, Stan Lee. Could you touch upon your relationship with Stan? And you've recorded some great stuff, some great DVDs with Stan over the years. How you know, to be able to touch your hero like that, to be able to be friends with your hero like that, that must be an amazing feeling. How did that all come about, and how did it feel?
It was really nuts. It came about through a guy named Jim Jacks, who was a producer on Mallrats. I'd written a scene for Mallrats. As I wrote the script, I would fax, remember faxes? I would fax pages to Jim Jacks. I was in New Jersey. He was out here in Hollywood, where I am now. So I'd fax him, I'd write a bunch, I'd print them, and then I'd fax him the pages. And so he read the scene, which become the Stan Lee scene, but when I first drafted it, it was not Stan Lee. It was just a random comic book icon that I made up. And so Jim goes, this scene, this sounds like the Wolfman Jack scene in American Graffiti. Meets like his idol and shit. He goes, who's that meant to be? I said, and if it was in the real world, I guess like Stan Lee. And Jim Jacks goes, why don't you write it for Stan Lee? And I was like, because I don't fucking know Stan Lee. And he goes, well, I do. And I was like, oh my God, Hollywood is good. These fuckers know each other. You know? So he goes, I go out to eat with him once a month. Jim Jacks, to his credit, like he built the Mummy franchise that Brendan Fraser was in and stuff.
Yeah.
He did Dazed and Confused. He did Tombstone. He did Mallrats and whatnot. He long believed in comic book movies and wined and dined Stan all the time, like hoping to fucking get the next Spider-Man at him. And going back before anyone gave a fuck about comic book movies, he treated him the way I treated him, which is like, I get to talk to Stan Lee. So he would go out to dinner with them like once a month at Dantana's, this restaurant out here.
Of course, yeah.
So he said, I'm going to see Stan at Dantana's. You know, you want me to talk about this? Ask him if he wants to be in the movie. I said, please. Oh, absolutely. So Jim goes out to dinner with Stan, comes back and calls me. You know, it's like midnight on the East Coast. And I said, what happened? And he goes, he wants to talk to you. I said, what? He said, he wants to talk to you. I said, is he into the movie? He goes, yes, but he just wants to have a conversation with you. I said, you bring him the pages? Because I had rewritten the pages for Stan. And Jim goes, yeah. I was like, did he read them? He goes, yeah. I was like, what did he say? He goes, you really want to get into it? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, he said, first reaction, he said, Jim, I would never say this shit. And Jim was like, you're not being you, Stan. You're being a variation of you or something like that. So he wanted to talk to you. He's got an issue. And I said, oh, my God, okay. So next day I call him, and he goes, hi, this is Stan Lee. And I said, oh, my God, man. I've been listening to your voice for years. I was a big fan of Spider-Man, the animated series, and he narrated it and stuff. So it sounded like watching Spider-Man and his friends. So, you know, we bullshitted for a few minutes, and he goes, so I got your pages, and I'm very flattered you want to include me in your movie. He said, but I've got a little issue. I said, okay. And he goes, in the script, you have me playing this guy who's talking about the one that got away. He's gone, and it's a well-written scene. I don't want you to think anything different. He's going, but if I play me in a movie talking about the one that got away, the one I got at home will lock me out of the house. He's going, this would kill Joni. You know, it's only ever been Joni for me. He's going, so could we do another scene afterwards where I, you know, reveal that it was all a joke, that I was doing it to help the kid? And I was like, oh my God, absolutely. You want to give me another scene? Let's do it and stuff. So I always thought it was so sweet. Like, he didn't want to offend Joni, even though like this bullshit movie like Mallrats, he was just like, I can't have people thinking there was some other woman and not Joni. Here, that was my perspective on it. And then I've grown to know Stan over like the course of 25 years or whatever before he passed away. Now I understand what it was. Yes, it was definitely affection for Joni because he absolutely loved his wife. But it was shrewd. Stan was a self-marketer beyond reproach. And what Stan did was got himself a second scene in the movie. He had one scene, and then all of a sudden he was like, well, I could be in another scene where I explained that I was just kidding around. And I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. Bam, he's in 2 scenes. So he was wonderful and crafty. And it began a friendship, you know, that I didn't recognize as a friendship for the first 10 fucking years I knew him. From 95 to 2005, every time I saw him, and he was always sweet to me, I just thought he was being polite because I put him in a movie. Took me about a decade to realize, like, no, you're friends. Like, he
friends with Stan Lee, yeah.
Which was crazy because I would never deign to be like, that guy's my friend. I'm not that person, you know. And shit. But when he fucking referred to me as friend, he had a dude who was his like caretaker, who
Max, right? Yeah.
I love Max, but this is not Max.
Oh, okay.
I absolutely love Max. I saw Max save Stan's life, just catch him on fucking steps. It was crazy. But this was somebody else who like worked on his finances and been with Stan for like years. We'd done this Audi commercial right around the time like Age of Ultron came out, and it was the Stan Lee cameo School of Acting. So he was a teacher. Michael Rooker was in the spot. Jason Mewes, Tara Reid was in the spot. Lou Ferrigno was in the spot. And the idea was Stan was teaching cameo acting because that's all he ever did. And stuff.
Yeah.
He put on like a general's hat and he goes, this is acting. And then he puts on a Thor's hat and he goes, this is acting, or vice versa or something like that. So really sweet spot. In any event, we shot with him all day. And then when he left, his guy was there and he was just like, he was like, how'd he do? I was like, oh, the old man did wonderful. He was great. He was funny, charming as per usual. And he goes, he feels very comfortable around you, Kevin. I was like, I feel super comfortable around him. It's an honor to be around him. And then he said, he thinks of you as a son. And that like made me cry right there on the spot.
Wow.
Like,
okay.
What? And he was like, yeah, you're one of the people that is, you know, he looks at you as somebody he recognizes. He sees a lot of himself in you and shit. Hearing shit like that was like, you know, I don't compare to Stan Lee. Motherfucker created an entire universe, created characters, co-created characters. We'll be telling stories with from now until the end of time and stuff. You know, I had Jay and Silent Bob. He had everything. So hearing in any way, shape, or form that in some way he recognized himself in me was always insanely flattering.
I mean, that really is such a touching story. Something that I so many things to talk to you about, mate, and so much that we're not going to have time for. So I want to touch upon Fatman and Batman and Fatman Beyond for a bit. So you did me a massive favor with Fatman and Batman years ago, towards the beginning of the run, and it's when you had Grant Morrison on, right? So
what a good episode! He was so beautiful.
It was phenomenal. So I used to share a house with a dude is a good friend of mine still to this day. He's called Ryan Hughes. And Ryan Hughes is a very well-known British designer. And his arc with the comic book industry, he's worked a lot with Grant over the years. And a lot of the very famous DC and Marvel logos, super famous DC and Marvel logos, Ryan has designed, right? But he's super tight with Grant. And round about that period of time, we were having a chat back at the ranch. And we were talking about Grant's run on Batman. I love Grant Morrison's work. And I'm a huge Batman fan, like yourself, lifelong, since my granddad gave me Batman comics when I was 3. And I was like, yeah, I don't know, man. This Grant Morrison run on Batman, as much as I love Batman and as steeped as I am in the universe of Batman, I actually don't know what the fuck this is about. I'm not really getting it, you know. So I find it underwhelming. It's not living up to my expectations. And I went around sort of disseminating that gospel to people for a year or two until I listened to that 2-part Fat Man and Batman he did with Grant, where he talks through the way it all works. And it was like, well, my take on it is what if every incarnation of Batman was a year or two of Bruce Wayne's life, you know, and he laid it all out like that, you know, so grim at first, he takes order, he lightens up, he experiments with drugs, which is where you get the 50s science fiction Batman from. He goes crazy, becomes a party animal, which is where you get Adam West and Burt Ward from. You know, Robin goes to college, he sobers up and thinks, shit, I better do something with my, you know, then he gets really dark. And once I listened to that, I was like, man, that's totally unlocking the key. And I took all of those books and I read them through again. And they all make complete sense. And now I love them, you know. Now I'm evangelical about them. And I think what you've achieved with Fat Man and Batman and now, you know, Fat Man Beyond and you and Mark Bernardin, it's such an amazing achievement. If you're a young comics fan, if you're a lifelong comics fan like me, it's such a fucking pleasure to listen to that show, man. It's fantastic. I'm super evangelical about what you guys have achieved. And my question is,
go ahead.
But it's like you've got that amazing chemistry with Mark, which it was. I'm guessing it was like almost happenstance that you found that, because that wasn't the original configuration of the show. So what's the genesis of all that? How did that come about?
When I first started like the show by myself, it was just like, oh, I would love to deep dive on fucking Batman and talk to the people that create the character, work on the character, define the character, add spokes to the Batmobile wheel. And so Mark was a guest who became an infrequent guest and then a frequent guest. And then the show was more fun for me when it was, oh, let's talk about all the comic book news. And it's less about like, let me sit down for a 3-hour interview with somebody and stuff. So it's not like I grew tired of the interviews, but suddenly the second incarnation of the show with Mark made it like more enjoyable for me, where I was like, oh, good. I love it quite a bit. So it's gone through like kind of an evolution. But the Grant episode I'll always love because I'll never make like a Batman and goofy Batman and Robin joke ever again. Like, oh, Batman and Robin, what was going on there? He so eloquently described their relationship, where he talked about like the boy looks up to the man he could be, and the man looks at the boy and the childhood he never had, the childhood that was robbed from. Fucking beautiful, man. Bring tears to your eyes. So I got to do that for a long time, talk to a bunch of people, talk to legends. I mean, we just lost Denny O'Neil.
To Denny O'Neil, right on.
And I got to speak to Denny as well. Neil Adams and so forth and so on. Stan did an episode. It was good, you know, what do they call it? Chicken soup for the soul. It came along for me at the exact right time. And now the incarnation it exists in is like now we're doing it as a live show. And we used to do it in front of people, but obviously that's gone away. But we still kind of go to the bar and do it like every Friday night. In fact, I'll be doing it again tonight.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I love it. It's great. And chicken soup for the soul is such a great analogy, you know, so heartwarming to watch. So how did, let's, to roll back to your own comics, how did you get into your epic run on Daredevil? Can you talk a bit about your epic run on Daredevil and my favorite probably of your comics work is your run on Green Arrow, which I just think is fantastic. What were the building blocks to getting into those? How did they all come about?
We met Joe Quesada and Jimmy Palmiotti on Mallrats in post when we had a screening in San Diego at the Comic-Con of Mallrats at Horton Plaza, 1995, summer of 95.
In San Diego, right? Yeah.
Yeah, 25 years ago, San Diego. So Joe and Jimmy went to the Mallrats screening that we had at Horton Plaza, and they thought the flick was funny. Me and Scott Mosier, my producer, while we were at Comic-Con, started meeting a bunch of comic book creators whose stuff we dug, who liked Clerks quite a bit, which it had just hit home video or was coming home video, or they saw it when it was, theatrical and stuff. So we were like, hey, we're making this movie set in the world of comics, and do you want to do artwork for the opening credits and stuff? So we collected an impressive array of talent, and Joe and Jimmy had a creator-owned character at that point called Ash that they were doing for Event Comics, a company they created. They had worked at Marvel, they had worked at DC. Here they were working for themselves. That was the big dream. Create a character and never mind drawing somebody else's, create a character and you own the world if somebody picks it up, if it goes forward. So they were having a blast with that, Painkiller Jane. They did the Jane Silent Bob cover in Mallrats, and it's got Ash on the cover as well. So, in just hanging out with them and stuff, I would talk about Frank Miller's run on Daredevil and how much I loved it. Joe loved it as well. So did Jimmy. It was a big touchstone for our generation. And then, what was it? Maybe 2 years later? I mean, they were in Chasing Amy. They're in the opening and closing con sequence, sitting at the tables and whatnot. But I guess it was after that, because it was before I headed into Dogma. The boys were like, Marvel's going to give us a bunch of titles to run. I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, we're going to edit 4 or 5 titles in the Marvel universe. They're not giving us Spider-Man or Iron Man, but they're giving us some cool characters like the Punisher. They're giving us the Inhumans. They're giving us Black Panther, and they're giving us Daredevil. I was like, I fucking love Daredevil. And he goes, that's why we're bringing it up to you, because how would you like to write the Daredevil? And, I was instantly said, yes, oh my God, that'd be amazing. And then time went by and I didn't write it. It was like, they were like, hey man, did you write the script yet? And they made the announcement and stuff. But, and Daredevil was going to be the first book in the Marvel Knights line. That's what it was called. So I was running late on the script. And then one day I was like, I can't do this. I was filled with self-doubt. And I was like, I can't fucking write Daredevil. I'm no Frank Miller. This is stupid. I should have said no. I'm going to tell him no now. So I called Joe and Jimmy. They were always together. I called Joe and I was like, Joe, I don't think I'm going to do the Daredevil scripts. He goes, why? Why not? I was like, I'm just not good enough, man. He's like, I'm not Frank Miller. And, I really shouldn't even go near the character. I'm a fan, not a creator, a writer. So thanks, but, I should pass. And he goes, well, I think you could do it, but I understand. And we hung up. And I was like, right on, I'm free. Then Jimmy called me 5-10 minutes later, Jimmy Palmiotti, and was like, you fucking piece of shit. He was he came at me so hard. He's like, how dare you fucking let us down like that? Joe was really counting on you, man. I was like, Joe didn't seem mad at all. He's going, because he don't want you to feel bad. Well, I don't give a shit about you. You said you were going to do something, and now you're going to wimp out because you're not Frank fucking Miller. None of us are Frank fucking Miller, man. The point is, you made a fucking promise to somebody. And I was like, all right, man, I'm going to fucking do it. Don't worry. So he bullied me into doing it again. And I called them, I guess, an hour later, and I said, here's the story. Because I was watching a movie called it was called God Told Me To, a Corman movie.
Yeah.
And so I was
it's a Larry Cohen film, right? Isn't it?
Larry Cohen film, that's it. And the idea was, what if Daredevil was given the Antichrist? So I called up Joe and Jimmy and was like, I got a story. What if Daredevil is given the Antichrist? And I'm like, great, run with that. They were just happy I was fucking engaged again. So I wrote the first 2 issues, true Marvel method. I just wrote like a 2-page breakdown of the entire story. And then Joe went and drew, came back with pages, and then I dialogue ballooned on all those pages, wrote all the dialogue after the story was laid out. By the time we got to the 3rd script, I was writing full script. And I learned the process of writing comic books, which is different than writing screenplays.
Yeah.
Unless you write a screenplay for someone else to direct, which I never do. Generally, I write stuff for myself to direct. You don't write a lot of descriptive passages because it's a waste of space on the page and stuff. But meanwhile, like in comics, it's all descriptive passages. You have to tell the artist everything you ever want to see in that frame because you're not drawing it yourself. When I write a script for a movie that I'm going to direct, I don't have to write every tiny detail. I remember what I want to do. I just put all the dialogue down and stuff and a vague description of where everyone's standing. But, you know, it was completely different in most cases when you're writing a comic book script, because since I'm not going to be the artist, you're giving them every beat of detail. If there's a coffee cup ring on the desk, you got to describe that, because you can't expect the artist is going to pull that shit out of your head. And then they bring their own shit to the story too, where they're like, look, I got my own storytelling abilities, so I'm going to be doing this. So if you want to see it on the page, you got to write full fucking script. Because the first 2 issues were beautiful. I was like, oh, but there's not that thing that I included in the breakdown and stuff. So after that, I became a full script writer. And it was absolute bliss. We were always like, I think the first book was on time. Second book was close to on time. 3, 4, and 5, maybe 6 were starting to be late. Then we lost a month. I remember we had to take a whole month off and shit because I was the writer and I was fucking like slow. And Nancy, Joe's wife, was our editor, and she was amazing, but she also ran a very tight ship and had zero compunction about calling up and be like, where are the fucking pages, Kevin? You owe us pages. I'm like, all right, I'm on my way. So when all was said and done, it was, you know, I had done comics prior to that. We had done the Jay and Silent Bob in Oni double feature. I think I had done the Clerks one shot. But this is the first superhero comic I'd ever written, first Marvel comic I ever wrote. And, we were a bunch of kids, me, Joe, and Jimmy, where, you know, they were characters it's not like it is now where motherfuckers, Black Panther is everything, where, you know, Daredevil became a TV show, where the Punisher has features and TV shows. And, you know, the Inhumans even had a TV show at one point. So all this stuff like broke huge. When they gave it to Joe and Jimmy to play with, it was because they're like, here, I don't care about this shit anymore. Joe turned Daredevil into something valuable. Like Frank did, of course, years before, but it had been years since Frank's Daredevil run. So suddenly Joe reinvigorated Daredevil. You don't get to that Daredevil movie or the series without Joe Quesada's Daredevil comic and stuff. So at that point, man, I was firmly ensconced in comics world. You know, Mallrats gave me some entree, bragging rights. Chasing Amy set in the world of comic book.
Absolutely,
solidified me a little more. Dogma would eventually play like a giant comic book movie and stuff, like a proto-Avengers of sorts. But, you know, writing Daredevil, having Wizard magazine always put me in their top 10 writers for the entire run of the book, do interviews with me and Jimmy and Joe. Like, that book was not in the top 100 books, and we launched it at #1 with our relaunch and stuff. It was crazy, like heyday, like stuff. Like for a kid who grew up comic books and loving comic books, to be involved in the industry in any way, shape, or form was a dream come true. To be writing on a character that I had loved in the hands of another creator was a dream absolutely come true. And it was at a time where nobody was looking. You know, nobody gave a shit. Like, I was a big fucking fish in a very small pond. And I wasn't even a big fish. Like, you know what I'm saying? I never made Batman or some such shit in the movie theaters. I made Clerks and Mallrats and Chasing Amy, and Dogma was probably the most popular of those. But I was the only cat from our world who was going over to comic books.
Right.
So they were like, this guy, like Joe Quesada to this day, is if you don't come along, Marvel dies. Marvel was going to bankruptcy and stuff. He's going, you shined a light back on comic books, made them cool and shit. It's very nice that he says that. But later on, I only did it because I saw Tim Sale brought in Jeff Loeb years ago. They did Challengers of the Unknown, and Jeff Loeb, who had written Commando and Teen Wolf, the movie, not the TV show.
Yeah.
He was a writer for Challengers of the Unknown. And I remember him having movie credits. And I was like, that's fucking awesome. There's a guy from movies who come to work in comics. If I ever fucking worked in movies, I would do that. I'd go to comics and write the comic books that I wanted. So then he went on to do Long Halloween, the Batman
amazing stuff. Yeah.
All the Marvel stuff.
All the Marvel color-themed books. Yeah.
All the color-themed books. So you know, that moment in time blipped on my radar just because I was a movie junkie and I knew he had written movies as well. So years later, suddenly when Joe's like, hey, you want to do Daredevil? I was like, fuck yes. Even before that had happened, I'd been in the DC Comics offices because I was working on Superman Lives, a screenplay in like 1996. So I asked, can I
By
go
the
to
way,
DC?
mate, I love your stories about, not to interrupt you, I just
Thanks.
love your DVD. I've seen you do that live actually in London,
Totally.
talking about
Thanks.
Superman Lives. Really, really funny shit.
It's an old
Amazing.
story at this point. But I went to DC and met, remember Jeanette Kahn
Yeah.
and what's his name?
Paul Levitz.
Paul Levitz, the two of them. So, you know, I was like, look, I'm working on the Superman script. I just came to pick everyone's brain. I got to meet Mike Carlin and stuff. So I was walking through the offices. I saw Darren Vincenzo's office, and he was the Green Arrow editor. So I poked my head in, and I was like, you don't know me, man, but if you ever want to put Green Arrow in the top 100, let me write that book. And then Joe asked me to do Daredevil like a month, 2 months after that and stuff. So then Daredevil was such a big success that like Green Arrow, Darren Vincenzo reached out to me. He's like, didn't you say you wanted to write a comic book? I was like, I did. And then Bob Schreck, who I'd worked with at Oni Comics, he was my first editor on the Jay and Silent Bob, you know, not just the Oni double feature, which was their first appearance, but the miniseries, the Clerks one shots and stuff. He had created Oni Comics with his friend Joe Nosemack. And so he left and went to DC. So he was like, do you want to come do Green Arrow at DC? Well, Darren Vincenzo brought me, and then Bob took over. Bob brought in Matt Wagner to do all these gorgeous fucking covers, man. So I bought all the cover artwork. So I was like, man, I was a huge Mage fan. And then that led to me doing Batman after that with my friend Walter Flanagan.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
It's been, you know, as a comic book fan, a kid who grew up reading this shit and loving this shit, having found it at the barber shop, you know, with his old man and when he was a kid, to aggregate toward it. Like, you know, it's not just like, hey, one day I got to write comic books. One day I got to make movies and shit. And when movies were like, come here and this is the sexy, I was like, give me 1 second. I'm going to go write some comic books.
Yes.
And thank God I did, because that's my like claim to fame. That's part of the reason people take me seriously in the comic book community, or even in the comic book movie community, because I never made a comic book movie, but they're like, well, he was working on Daredevil before fucking any of this shit was cool. Like I beat Joss Whedon to Marvel. I was working at Marvel before Joss even got there. So because of that, it's afforded me this wonderful credibility in the space where people are like, oh, you're an old hand, because
you're
of my
a legit comics guy,
Stan, because of Stan and Mallrats. Like, you know, in Captain Marvel 2 years ago, Stan's reading the Mallrats script, the cameo reach around kind of.
That must have been such an amazing moment for you, mate. When you saw that must have felt incredible.
Better than if I'd won an Oscar, and I don't even say that facetiously.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that movie's gonna live for fucking ever. It made like $1 billion. Like, people saw Mallrats written by Kevin Smith and remembered, like, oh yeah, Stan was in that. Like, at a time in my career where most people are starting to forget my fucking ass. So it was, I saw it as like, you know, when we put Stan in Mallrats, it was like me introducing him to my generation, going, this is the guy that, you know, is Spider-Man's baby daddy. And then years later, he did the same thing for me in Captain Marvel, going, this is the guy that created Silent Bob. Remember that? And shit. So comic books have given me absolutely everything. Not just the joy of reading them. They've fueled my work. Like when I'm not, you know, now people just hire me because I'm a comic book expert. We're in a world where they need such a thing as comic book stuff, where you get hired to interview people at conventions, although obviously not now. Although I did the Comic-Con at home for the Bill and Ted panel. So I got to interview Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves and stuff.
Oh, so mate, that must have been fantastic. That must have been great.
It's so cool because you don't get to Jay and Silent Bob without Bill and Ted. So like I was able to blow them both up to be like, you know, thank you for the goofy shit you did, because it fueled the goofy shit that I did. So it's this wonderful like world where, because I embraced it so out loud and proud at the beginning of my career, it has buoyed me for 25 years. Doesn't matter whether I'm doing well or doing poorly in my own personal storytelling or movies or whatever, being a pop culturalist, being a comic book guy, comic book man based on the show or whatever, like being there, having comics be something that I speak about regularly, not just me, but like this beautiful art form, this true American art form and whatnot, has really buoyed my career. It's made me relevant in times where I'm not relevant at all.
I mean, that's a bit of an extreme claim, and I love your humility. It's great that you say that, but I do think the universal power of your comics and your connection to it, which is of course how you get to direct all those Arrowverse shows. Are you going to be doing any more of those when we're post-pandemic? Do you see that in your future?
I hope so. I miss those kids. I loved working on Flash. I really absolutely loved working on Supergirl, because Melissa is just the light of the world. She's awesome. So I didn't get to do last season because we were off touring Jay and Silent Bob reboot. Jason got to go be in an episode that Melissa directed, but I didn't get to go back this year. And so I was like, all right, when they go back, I'll go back. I was hoping to get one in the second half of the season, like once our tour was over. Like we finished the tour February 26th. They generally wrap the show in April. So I was like, maybe I'll be able to pick up one episode before they close down for the season. And then COVID happened and they closed down very early. So, now Melissa's pregnant. So I don't know when they're going to get back to work. And regardless of that, with all this COVID, who knows when anyone's going to get back to work. Right. The moment they do, I would fly there, pun intended, in a heartbeat, man. I mean, working on that show is good practice. You don't always get to make a movie every year of your life, let alone every 2 years. So it's a skill set that gets rusty quick because you don't get to practice it very often. As a writer, I write all the time. As a podcaster, I record all the time. But as a filmmaker, every once in a while, I make a film. Doing those CW shows was like kind of like a refresher course, like going back to film school, like, oh yeah, like getting a lube job on a car. It was just nice to keep things kind of going between features where you're like, oh, and you get to bring a skill set to a job that you don't normally do. They get different directors for every episode on that show. And sometimes directors don't even watch the show, they just need a director. So not only did they have a director who was a fan of the show, he was an exuberant, ultra knowledgeable fan of the show who made the whole shoot a fucking party for everybody because it was a celebration. I'm like, you fuckers do this every week. I never get to do this. I'm never in Metropolis. I'm never fucking be in Central City. Like this, for me, I know, like I would tell Grant, like, I know you've put on the suit hundreds of times by now. This is the first time I'm shooting you putting the suit on. That's everything to me. So because of the enthusiasm I would bring to the shoot, they bring me back over and over again. And it's not like fantastic money. Don't get me wrong. It's like good money for doing nothing whatsoever. But it's, I could make more money just going out and being me and talking about shit. But I need shit to talk about in order for people to be interested. So I would start doing those CW gigs just to have new material, just to come home and be like, hey, I did an episode of Flash. Let me tell you like what it was like and all these jokes and stuff like that. So it also provided material. It gave me practice, kept the gears oiled, put me in a world of costumes. I never want to make those superhero movies because they're so big and they look like they require a lot of concentration and talent that I do not have, particularly visual talent. But doing the CW shows, you can't hurt yourself. They're 8-9 days long max. So like, it's even if I drive the train off the rails, they'll figure that out by day 5 and still have 3 days to correct or something like that. But I've never driven the train off the rails because like I so fucking care about this shit. I treat it so seriously. So in many ways, like, I'm very ideal for those shows. I don't see myself as a guy like, make a Marvel movie. I don't have that level of talent. But like, those shows are well-oiled machines that happen without me every week. So, by the time I got to Flash, it had been up and running for a season already. They were on season 2.
Yeah.
By the time we got to Supergirl, same fucking thing. I think they were on their season 2 at that point. So, I can't fuck it up. It's a well-oiled machine that they shoot with or without me every week. And the director on a show like that, very arbitrary. Because you can't I'm going to bring my style to it. You have to shoot a fucking show that everyone's used to seeing every week. So, there's not a lot of creative freedom. You're essentially executing, a recipe over and over again. And I think that's why a lot of film directors kind of don't go toward it. But for me, I love the fact that they made this thing every fucking week and that they executed, because that gives me a chance to elevate it. All I have to do, I know I'm safe as a kid and they're going to make a good show with or without my fat ass. But if I could keep them excited, if I could be like, this is fucking amazing. And that's what I do. My energy level is high. Every time one of them stops acting, I'm like, holy shit, give it up. And I make everybody applaud and shit. And they got into it. At the end, they gave me shirts that said, I got the clap from Kevin Smith. They called it the clap. I bring enthusiasm. I don't have talent to bring them, but I can bring oh shit, I watched this show, so this is how you guys could totally do it and stuff. And because of that, they kept bringing me back. So I hope one day there's a vaccine where we all get to go back and tell those stories, because it'd be so strange to do a Supergirl story where some people are in masks, but they're not villains.
Right on.
Fighting the unseen killer, the virus.
I so completely agree, mate. We're in the final stretch, the final couple of minutes of our hour together. So I just wanted to say one thing and ask you another thing. The one thing I wanted to say is Jay and Silent Bob reboot. I think personally, as somebody who's seen literally everything you've done ever, delivered one of the most beautiful 10 minutes of your career, which is the Chasing Amy mini sequel. Unbelievable, mate. Fucking fantastic. Honestly, I had tears in my eyes when I watched that. It's incredible.
I'm so with you. What I love about that's some of the finest shit I've ever been involved with in my life. That scene's beautiful. The fact that it exists at all, but the fact that it exists inside Jay and Silent Bob reboot, that's the trick. That's the gift. That's the little miracle of it all, where it's this movie is goofy as fuck, and suddenly in the middle of it, we stop the movie and give you this beautiful fucking sequel and a look inside the life of some characters that you grew up watching, in Chasing Amy and stuff. And Ben came back was beautiful, and he crushed it. He sounds perfect. Joey was wonderful. And
amazing.
The sentiment behind it, the whole idea of you're not important anymore. Your kid is what's important, was just delivered so well. And Ben, all credit to Ben. I wrote the monologue for him and I was like, you crushed it. And he goes, you just said, you wrote the shit that I want to say right now in my life. He's going, it was easy to deliver this. This is how I fucking feel about my own kids. So it is, I agree with you. It's such a beautiful, beautiful scene, man. That's a fun movie. It's a goofy flick, but fuck, that scene is magic.
It's exceptional, mate. Well done, really. Thank you. It's great to watch. And my question is, of course, how are things going with Clerks 3? How are things going with Twilight and the Mallrats? What is next for you? What are you working on at the moment, mate?
Right now, I'm working on, we're closing up this horror movie, Kilroy was here, that we shot.
Right on.
I had a heart attack. We were shooting it before I had a heart attack, then I had a heart attack, then we shot more afterwards. Then we got into Jay and Silent Bob reboot. So now with all the time down, we're able to finish it and stuff. I wrote second draft of Twilight of the Mallrats, and we're in discussions about when that would happen, which looks like obviously not until 2021. There was initially some people don't write the quarantine into it, don't write COVID into it. They thought this shit would pass. Where I'm like, this is 9/11.
It finds an entire generation. It's not going. It's not like
you're going to be seeing people in masks for the rest of your fucking life, whether there's a vaccine or not. People are going to be like, maybe I should wear a mask outside. So I was like, look, it's got to be worked in, particularly because we're telling a story about a bunch of people crammed into a fucking mall. So that's and it's second draft right now. I just sent that off to Jason Lee. The Clerks 3 is slowly coming along. That took a backseat to Mallrats, and then there's this TBS like contest show that I'm on that's called called Celebrity Show Off, and we've been doing this little sitcom called Sun in Lockdown.
Sun in Lockdown, yeah.
Yeah, that distracted for the last like almost 8 weeks at this point. Been a welcome distraction. But I've also been working on He-Man, closing up Masters of the Universe, which is a series that we're doing for Netflix, comes out in 2021. So badass, man. We just finished up recording most of the voice cast. So Lena Headey is done. She plays Evelyn. Mark Hamill is playing Skeletor. He's finished up. Chris Wood is our He-Man and Prince Adam. He's done. Sarah Michelle Gellar, she's our Tila. She's finished up.
Wow.
So I think I've got some more Griffin Newman stuff to do. He plays our Orko, and he's fucking magical. Liam Cunningham is our Man-at-Arms, and like
brilliant. Oh yeah,
so good. He has so much heart and fucking soul, man. It's crazy. So that has turned out really well. Powerhouse Animation, they're in Austin, Texas, out here. You know, a lot of the businesses shut down. All the businesses shut down, but animation continues forward. Right now, that's the biggest game in town because people can be in their homes and still make a cartoon. You don't need a studio. You don't need a crew and shit like that. So He-Man or Masters of the Universe has been moving forward consistently throughout all of this, man. I've seen 6 animatics now, and they're gorgeous. And the animatics are like, you know, it's pencil sketch version of the show, but you see it and hear it all so fucking clearly. Now we're starting to get the art versions back, like the first pass at art and stuff. So I'll be seeing that for months to come. That process, like I remember when we announced it at PowerCon last year, like we're doing Masters of the Universe. I was like, I'll see you in 2020. And Mattel, Rob David, Mattel pulled me aside. He's like, no, you won't. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, this shit takes a long time. He's like, it's 2021. I was like, what? So that's been a nice part of quarantine, watching the animatics come in month after month, because you can see the show and it's going to be so fucking good. So there's that. And then once, I guess Clerks 3 is the last bit of business. But now, like I said, with other things out of the way, I'll start concentrating on that.
Fantastic. Thank you, mate. You got to tell Harley that she did a fantastic job in Reboot. I think there was a definite leap in her work from the things I've seen her in previously to Reboot. She really blew me away in that movie. So, you know, you should be proud of her, man.
Thank you. I feel like she took a jump. I was happy for her, you know, as her dad, of course, but on set, as her director, I was like, good for this one. She went off and did some fucking homework, and Stella Adler trained and came back and, you know, had a plan. I didn't have a plan for her character, Millie. You know, she's very two-dimensional on the page, and I was like, well, we'll figure it out there. And thankfully, the kid figured it out before we got to set and really made her a three-dimensional character. When she cries, you know, in that flick, again, it has no place in the Jane Silent Bob movie, but
it's real.
Really works.
Yeah. And finally, mate, favorite Marvel movie? Your favorite Marvel movie?
Don't get me wrong. I fucking love Infinity War and Endgame. I think I've now watched Infinity War 78 times total, and I think I've seen Endgame 36 times. But the one that started it all, still magical to me, is Iron Man.
Yeah,
Jon Favreau's Iron Man. Watching, you know, the redemption arc of Tony Stark as played by Robert Downey Jr., who, you know, those of us who've been around a long time knew that he had a couple rough years and stuff. Seemed very in keeping, in tandem with his character. Like Favreau had a vision for why this guy would be the guy, and it was the absolute right choice. And it still has one of my favorite moments in any Marvel universe and movie, and probably the moment that launches like the Marvel universe more or less, at least under Iron Man, you know, Captain Marvel having come before him. But when he's, you know, getting out of the cave and Jensen is like dying, you know, and he realizes he's not going to make it.
Yeah.
And it's like, this always makes me cry. He's like, don't waste your life.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful, that's in a fucking comic book movie, bro.
Beautiful moment.
You know what I'm saying? Like you mostly pay drama to give you that, something that real.
Yeah.
And watching, you know, it's an incredibly human moment in a story that is absolutely inhuman, about a man who seals himself in a robot fucking suit and fights another guy in a bigger robot suit and shit like that. And still, that incredibly human moment is the strong spine upon which all of those adventures hung. By the time you get to the moment where he's like, I am Iron Man, and he takes out Thanos and Thanos' army, it only exists because of that one exchange that he had with
through line all the way through
life. Yeah, honestly, like they talked about like that when Tony did the snap, they had shot that scene where it was him seeing his daughter Morgan all grown up, and it's really beautiful. But like to me, should have been that guy. Should have been Jensen, who was just like, "You did it. You did."
Yeah, right. Of course. Well said, brother. Amen to that. On that beautiful final word note, I just want to say this has been Forbidden Planet 42, celebrating 42 glorious years of Forbidden Planet with one of our most popular guests ever, the multi-hyphenate, the pop culture master, Mr. Kevin Smith. Thanks for joining us, Kevin. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. I missed the place. It was only mere months ago, back in December, when I was there at Forbidden Planet, and we did a signing of Jane Silent Bob reboot signing. Back before any of this, before anybody knew.
Great signing.
The world would collapse. It was a wonderful signing.
Yeah.
And people were, we were hugging people, close to people, hands on people, breathing on each other. Shit that like will hold me over until there's a vaccine one day. Like one of the last interactive experiences I had in a comic book store was at Forbidden Planet, man, where a bunch of people came through and I was arms around them taking pictures. So one day we'll get back to that, kids. One day we will.
Right on. Thank you, brother. Please come back and join us. We can't wait to see you, man. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure.
Thumbs
Great
up.
talking to you.
Thanks,
See you
man.
later.